started to speak, I looked up the numbers of trade of China and Russia in Central Asia. China is $90 billion turnover, Russia 44. Even with my PhD in political science, I can do the math. It's 134 billion versus American 2 billion with Kazakhstan and some change with the rest of Central Asia. It's untenable. I am a Jackson Vanik baby. In 1974, I was 15 years old, living in Saratov, Russia, trying to leave with my family for Israel. We couldn't leave. The American legislature passed the Jackson Vanik back then. Ladies and gentlemen, I have news for you. Everybody who wanted to leave left. Some of them went back to Russia. I pity them. But this is not an issue anymore. I met with the Jewish community in Kazakhstan. Guess what? The rabbi's last name is same as mine. It's Rabbi Cohen. That's not an issue. But what is an issue? The issue is why these great United States are clinging to an antique piece of legislation that is no longer, not only it's no longer relevant, it's an impediment to investment and trade. Yes, there's an annual waiver in the cases of Kazakhstan. I think there's a presidential waiver in case of Turkmenistan. Most of post-Soviet countries and the former Soviet bloc countries were exempt, even Russia. And when I was in one of the big conservative think tanks here in town, I advocated for lifting Jackson Vanik from Russia. Well, it was a different Russia. It was Russia that was not invading its neighbors. But Russia and Belarus, for good reasons, are under Jackson Vanik after they were exempt. We put it back after 2022. But there's no reason on this planet why it should apply to Kazakhstan and the rest of Central Asia. It should be a bipartisan issue. And we saw here in this room, Congressman Joe Wilson and Congressman Panetta together are articulating the reasons why we need to get rid of this. So because of the background that I just mentioned, because of equity, this is not an equitable piece of legislation. And dusting off my lapsed lawyer hat, this was not a legislative intent of this piece of legislation. The legislative intent was to let, as they said back then, let my people go, get the Jews out of the Soviet Union. Geopolitics. Geopolitics are extremely important here. As candidate Trump mentioned, we may be on the verge of World War III. And without that dramatization, I would say our competition and friction with Russia and China are getting worse and worse. And in that respect, if you look at the map, if you look where Russia and China are and where Central Asia is, plus Iran, plus Afghanistan, etc., you should recognize how vitally important these countries are. And as I just mentioned, our trade and investment there, our investment from the 90s, the legacy investment into oil is still quite high, especially in Kazakhstan. But we're laggards on trade. And there's no reason why we shouldn't have more investment in transportation corridors that these countries are developing east and west, in agriculture that has a tremendous potential in Kazakhstan, in biotech, fintech was mentioned. A company called CIPE had an IPO in London and in Kazakhstan, and it was over $4 billion, maybe more. I don't remember the exact figure. So it's an emerging market with educated and talented population And American companies would be amiss if we didn't invest, if we didn't trade, and getting rid of that roadblock, a rusty piece of legislation that is left there, is an obvious thing to do. Thank you very much.
To repeal Jackson-Vanik and grant permanent normal trade relations with the CIPE countries and particularly Kazakhstan. The question is what to say to convince policymakers and other shakers and movers who are perhaps a little cautious of Congressman Panetta's bill and the other legislation that's been introduced to say, well, the conditional normal trade relations, the annual waiver for Kazakhstan is fine. If the U.S. has had more trade this year and last year with Kazakhstan than ever, what is the quick argument to make to those who are a little skeptical?
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful, wonderful question. Basically, I'm for the past 3 years, I had over 100 meetings on the Hill. So I do have a long set of arguments why it's important. Among them, from systemic issues, since we have the sanctions mechanisms expanding. So it's going to be wise from the policy perspective to fine-tune those sanctions mechanism and not to create a chaos. Once countries have started meeting criteria, there is no point in keeping them under sanctions. Secondly, US is we are trying to meet the needs of our partners as much as we want our partners to meet our needs. So we are talking about global infrastructural development to ensure the viability of supply chains. We are talking about rare earth minerals. Let me give you just one figure. Half of global production of natural uranium concentrated in Central Asia. If this is not a compelling argument, if the United States is not willing to secure the uninterrupted, unhindered access to those types of resources, then, but overall, we are talking about looking at Central Asia with its own, recognizing its own merits. For the past 3 decades, US has been looking at Central Asia through different lenses, through the lenses of Afghanistan and counterterrorism, Iran, Russia, China. But please recognize this is a 70, 80 million region with huge potential. And US companies, private companies, have been part of this development story from the early beginning. We are not only saying Chevron and Exxon. We're saying the names like Citibank. Citibank has been present in Kazakhstan for the past 30 years. We are now diversifying, and we are blessed to have partners like Waptec, GE Healthcare, Pfizer, PepsiCo, all of whom are opening new companies, new facilities, production facilities in the region. So it's a win-win situation. We are, there is a catchphrase by one of my predecessors. It's not about great game. It's all about great game. And we are presenting those opportunities, not only Kazakhstan, but entire Central Asia. So this is the short list of arguments from my side.
But my question then is, and I've been to Kazakhstan many times, Chimkent, Almaty, what can U.S. citizens on the ground in Central Asia do about this, Jackson? Is there anything we can do from there? Is there anything we can, I'm Jewish background myself. But I agree, it's time for this thing to go. So if there's anything we can do to help, please let us know. Thank you.
Write a letter to your member of the Congress. That's it. As easy as 1, 2, 3. So the more voices will add to these great cause, the better. And we do have, by the way, the united opinion of major Jewish organizations in supporting the repeal of Jackson-Vanik Amendment and recognizing the PNTR, Permanent Normal Trade Relations, with Kazakhstan and other Central Asian states.
I would just add that in addition to writing your congressman, you can always write a letter to an editor, Washington Times.
Oh, okay, that's a good
New
idea.
York Times, Washington Post, New York Times, you name it. Thanks.
Great.
Also to trade associations in the United States. I believe that's a good approach too. And next question.
Is there any with the prospect of Jackson-Vanik perhaps being taken down? Are there any trade mechanisms or government mechanisms that we in the United States and Kazakhstan can enact immediately to inhibit trade or to spur trade and to create more jobs for the United States and for Kazakhstan?
Yeah.
So Jackson-Vanik is really low-hanging fruit, and it costs nothing, basically. We're not asking for any financial allocations. It's simply a good political signal to U.S. businesses. As for the rest, I would definitely love to hear that question posed to the development financial institutions like DFC, Millennium Challenge Corporation, Exim Bank, USTDA. There is a whole network of institutions, and we would love for them to engage. And there are very promising signs. WAPTEC alone is benefiting from almost $1 billion worth of credit line from Exim Bank to Kazakhstan Railroads, KTZ. So this is only one example, but there might be many success stories.
We tend to focus on our disagreements with China. One area that just came to my mind where probably Washington and Beijing would agree and probably should explore some consultations is sovereignty and territorial integrity of all 5 Central Asian states. There were politicians in the region north of Kazakhstan who raised questions or commented on historicality of current Kazakhstan state-within borders. And I think it's absolutely unacceptable when responsible members of legislature or other members of the government, even higher than that, talk about it. We saw that language apply to other countries in the region and what it led to, the horrible tragedy in Ukraine. So if and when one of the American administrations thinks about a constructive engagement with Beijing, I think Central Asia and rules of the game, rules of engagement, even in the Cold War, in the original Cold War, there were rules of engagement. There were certain things people didn't do to each other. For example, they didn't kill each other's intelligence officers. So engagement, constructive rules of the road, I think this is something skillful diplomats could explore. The question is, do we still have them? Thank you.
There is nothing wrong in having constructive, stable, predictable relations with your neighbors. And don't forget, when we are talking about Central Asia, we are talking about the biggest landlocked region in the world. And Kazakhstan is the biggest single landlocked country in the world. So it's not only natural, but it's a necessity for us, a natural necessity for Kazakhstan. That said, I again want to reiterate this policy that we have. So it's not only multivectoral, it's great gain policy. And Central Asia is definitely a region where different superpowers can benefit without losing anything. So we want to serve as a bridge. We want to serve as a place where we can converge different interests into one good thing. Thank you.
Does the current Congress have time to push the legislation out of the gate, or it needs to go to the next Congress? And this is not up to me. And I hope with everything else on their plate, congressmen and women can legislate it and get it done. If not, unfortunately, Ambassador's work will be cut out for him in 2025.
Mr. Nance, thank you for raising this very important matters. And you reminded me of the very important nuance. When Kazakhstan joined WTO back in November 2015, as a country affected by Jackson-Vanik Amendment, no invocation, no special statement was made by the US delegation, which was the case when all other countries prior to Kazakhstan were joining WTO. And they gradually moved, they gradually graduated, but still the invocation in the case of Tajikistan is still in force. But no such statement was made with regard to Kazakhstan, recognizing probably the, and that was a commitment on the US side. So it's basically we regard it as unfulfilled promise. And speaking of the businesses, correct me if I'm wrong, but any new business analyzing the landscape, analyzing the new investment destination would definitely go look at certain facts. And facts on the ground is that Kazakhstan is under this sanction mechanism called Jackson-Vanik with actually no reason for that. With regard to the prospects of Jackson-Vanik, listen, US politics are very dynamic, and there are so many consequential events happening. But if you look back, at any given point, you can come up with different excuses, reasonable and valid excuses. But, well, that might be Afghanistan, different crises, or you name it, or domestic politics issues. But time has come. We definitely believe that now is the time to act. And if US is, I might not sound diplomatic this time around, if our American partners are serious about the prospects, they need to back up the political promises with some actions. And this is what we expect. And again, repeal of Jackson-Vanik is low-hanging fruit. It costs nothing to US taxpayers, but it can bring much more to private companies, to the US as a nation, as a state.